How do you start your own startup? It's not as simple as just incorporating an LLC, finding a co-founder, and then just going for it. Although I don't advise against that approach, I just think that having these 4 core fundamentals, what I call the core 4, makes it far easier for you to start a startup, to form a direction, to know where you're going, and then to actually reach that start line so you can start the actual process of building your startup. Without these 4 fundamentals, you won't have a clear direction for your startup, and then you'll just fizzle out. So what are the 4 fundamentals? The 4 fundamentals are industry, problem, product, and target customer. You have to know all 4 of these fundamentals. You have to know what they are for your specific startup in order for you to establish a direction, in order for you to know where you're going. So let's start with the first fundamental, industry. Obviously, you have to pick an industry that's where the market is for you, where you're selling to. Industries can range from payments to healthy foods to legal technology. There's really no hard and fast rule for knowing which kind of industry to pick. Now, there's this ongoing debate actually in the literature. It's whether you should pick an industry that you know or whether you should pick an industry that you have no exposure to. In my opinion, I think it's actually much better to have domain expertise. So when I was starting my own startup, our first startup was actually in the payments industry, and we quickly realized that we had no domain expertise, which meant being outcompeted very quickly. Although we identified a competitive advantage, we just didn't have the domain expertise to distribute our product, to grow it, to execute to a point where we could sustain the growth of a startup. So in the end, we decided to go for legal technology, which is actually an industry that I have some exposure to because I used to work in law. I worked in law for 1 year and 7 months before transitioning to startups. So it was actually an industry that I have had a lot of exposure to, and I'm still actually involved in a New York legal community. So I'm still very close to the pain points and problems faced by people in the legal industry. And I personally find having domain expertise in the industry that you choose a far more fitting approach for me. I feel like I'm more in tune with my customers' needs and demands. I know the lingo, I know the conventions, so it's much easier for me to distribute the product. It's much easier for me to iterate on the product, to adapt to changing pain points and needs, and to know where to find out about these ever-evolving pain points and needs versus being in an industry where I have no contacts, where I have no industry links whatsoever, where I have no know-how. It's a personal choice. Some people say that if you don't have exposure to a particular industry, you're more inclined to question age-old assumptions, which leads to innovation. But let's move on to the next fundamental, which is problem. In order to build a successful product, which actually leads into the third fundamental, you have to know what problem you're solving. In a market, value is exchanged for value. You give value to someone else in exchange to give value to you. On your end of the transaction, it's usually you providing a solution to a pain point that your target customer has. In exchange, your target customer, seeing your solution as worthy of payment, pays you some form of monetary value. That's how you create a business. Now, why is the problem so important? It's because it is what justifies your existence. You exist to build a solution to a problem. The problem is extremely important because it's what justifies the whole interaction with the target customer. If you cannot provide a solution to the problem that you have identified, you have no business, you have no target customer, and there's really no point in picking an industry because you don't even know why you're doing what you're doing. The product should come after the problem. Now, something I see very often is people thinking of an idea, which is in itself a product, and then going out there to find a problem that the product solves. This is backwards. This is going to waste you a lot of time, and this is probably not going to work. The best thing to do is ask just people in general, what problems are you facing, identify a problem, then think of an idea for how to solve that problem, then build that idea into a product. The product should solve the problem so well that people would be willing to pay you for that solution. That's really the core link between industry, problem, and product. And then finally, target customer. Your target customer is the person who has the problem and is the person who can understand your product and then embrace it as their solution to your problem. Now, there are actually quite a few nuances to this whole linkage between target customer, product, and problem. I won't cover all these subtleties in this video, but one thing I will say is that your target customer is basically the bedrock of your business. If you cannot satisfy your target customer, that means you haven't solved the problem. That means you haven't built the right product. Listen to your target customer, because your target customer is the only distributor of feedback, is the only source of data that you'll get. If you don't listen to your target customer, you might as well just close down your business and just don't continue on. You cannot get accurate data to act upon unless you know firstly who your target customer is, and then you go ask them about the problem, and then eventually ask them about their feedback on your product. So that's just a very brief overview of these 4 fundamentals that you must get right. You must identify the industry you're going into, you must identify the problem you're solving, then you must identify the product you're building, and then you must identify the target customer that you are going to serve. Once you identify all 4 of those fundamentals, once you have a concrete idea of those 4 fundamentals, then you are ready to start a startup that builds on those 4 fundamentals, transforms that knowledge you have about those 4 fundamentals into a business, into something that produces revenue. But don't forget, guys, just getting those 4 fundamentals right does not mean you will build a successful startup. It only gets you to that starting line. One other caveat is that you will be changing those fundamentals probably in the near future. You'll be adapting, you'll be changing, you'll be adopting new versions of those fundamentals. For us, we changed industry. Then once we identified the legal industry as something we wanted to go into, we then started changing the problem and the product. We came up with the product first, and then we tried to find the problem. And that's actually the pitfall that we succumb to, not finding a problem to solve, but creating a product first and then finding the problem to solve. So we kept changing the problem over and over again. We kept changing the product over and over again. We had no idea what a target customer was. Eventually, we settled on a target customer, a problem, a product, and an industry. Finally, but it took 8 months, and it took iterations and testing and talking to people. And that's actually one thing I didn't mention throughout this entire video, that it's a constant process of testing and iterating. You'll get to start once you have a concrete idea of those 4 fundamentals. Once you're able to say confidently that these are the 4 fundamentals that you'll be focusing on, that you know what your industry is, that you know what your product is, that you know what your problem is, that you know what your target customer is, then you're ready to start. And then you just go and collect feedback from your target customer. Of course, you've identified an industry, then you need to know what problem you're solving, and then you start coming up with ideas to solve that problem, and then you test those ideas with your target customer. And then sometimes your target customer will change, sometimes you'll think of focusing on a different problem, sometimes, and this is probably the fundamental that changes the most, you'll change your idea to try to suit the problem or the target customer's needs, which is really the problem. And then in rare cases, you'll change your industry, but usually you won't change your industry completely unless you just happen to have no domain expertise whatsoever and you want to take the approach of having domain expertise in an industry because that makes you more comfortable. It's just a lot of change. There's a lot of change in this process, and I don't want you guys to feel intimidated at all. So yeah, that's all I have to say about these 4 fundamentals, what I call the core 4. And just to recap, they are industry, product, problem, and target customer. So yeah, that's all I have to say about these core 4 fundamentals. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button below, and feel free to send me a message or just comment in the video so we can continue the discussion. But yeah, I hope that was useful, guys, and stay tuned for the next video.